Hello everyone, thank you for watching another video from Interesting History. Today we're taking a look at another what if. And I wanted to preface this book again. If you're interested in checking it out, there'll be a link down in the description below if you happen to purchase the book. A little bit of the proceeds will come back to me actually through Amazon. And I just opened up the back of this book and it is a graduation card from my high school 7 years ago. That's the last time I read this book. We're taking a look at what would have happened if war itself would have been declared in 1938. So if you're taking a look at the thumbnail itself, it's Neville Chamberlain and Adolf Hitler. And I want to preface that the article in this book was written by a man named Williamson Murray. He's a historian from the Ohio State University. Now, I think Dr. Murray here does a very good job of explaining how the situation kind of arose in 1938. And I kind of want to just provide, there's so much here that it's like, so think of it like a web. War 1938, web with 29 tentacles going off of it. I'm going to try to count on each one of those tentacles as best as I can. And let you know kind of what I think at the end here of what would have happened if war would have been declared in 1938. So just kind of like a historical background, Neville Chamberlain allowed Hitler to annex the Sudetenland, which happened to be the Czech Maginot Line in 1938, proclaiming that there would be peace in his time. And at the time, historians kind of believed that the pact allowed Britain to build up the Air Force and Army for an additional year, which is entirely true. But Hitler himself was kind of disappointed that Britain didn't provide more pushback to him. And he kind of wanted to launch the Wehrmacht in 1938 against the Czech Republic. And when you look at it, 1938 was also a very important year for Hitler. He had completed Anschluss with the Austrian government, and he quickly turned his attention towards the Czechoslovakian people. He had become angry by the defensive preparedness of the Czechs, and he ordered his generals to invade on October the 1st, 1938. Now, there was one issue here, is that France guaranteed Czechoslovakian independence. So let's take a look at the German army itself in 1938. And what you can kind of tell just as a ballpark outside look is that they weren't necessarily prepared for war in the way that you would think the German army of World War II was in 1938. The Luftwaffe itself possessed no prerequisites for battle, so they didn't have any of the necessary airplanes they needed. Rearmament itself had prepared 48 divisions, but only 3 of these would be panzer divisions, which would be very vital in the blitzkrieg tactics that they would use on Poland and eventually France in 1939 and 40. The rest of the made German army were actually just World War I style infantry units. And then the rest of that was made up of Landswehr, which consisted of out-of-shape World War I veterans. The overall demand of the German army would have been for resources. So as Germany gobbled up more land, they gobbled up more resources. That was the reason for Lebensraum. You needed more living space in order to have more resources so that you can guarantee yourself for the future. And the other big time issue in 1938 was something called the Fritsch-Blomberg crisis, in which Hitler removed a general on the general staff for being a homosexual on loose charges. And the way that Hitler had come to power in 1933 was with army help. And this was kind of seen as like a backstab to the military. And they began to kind of mistrust him in 1938. So if we look at the Czech side of the conflict, the Czechs had built very complex fortifications. If you think of like the Maginot Line from the French, it's very similar in terms of defensive structure. Their equipment was excellent. The reason why Hitler himself wanted to go into the Czechoslovakia, was for these the Skoda Works, which is renowned worldwide in military circles for excellent equipment. And Hitler had worried that his general staff's plan would result in another Verdun. So the initial plan was to invade from the side and hit these fortifications. And if you know about World War I and the Battle of Verdun, the German army launched an attack at a string of French forts, which led to a year-long battle. And Hitler was very worried that that was going to be something that would happen to him in 1938. The battle plans themselves were the motorized divisions were to attack Prague, and hopefully, he would use his blitzkrieg tactics, attack Prague, take Prague, the war itself would be over. Well, Czechoslovakia would be out of the conflict, hopefully within a week. And that would kind of deter Britain and France from joining the conflict. So that was kind of Hitler's idea for a quick conflict. So let's take a look at kind of some of the other powers in the war. Britain themselves were ill prepared. They could maybe send 2 divisions over to France. The Air Force wasn't necessarily prepared for any, well, you kind of think of like the Battle of Britain, but the Air Force wasn't ready really even for anything in 1938. Someone that was Hitler's ally in the beginning, but eventually turned to be his enemy, Joseph Stalin, had shot most of his army leadership in the 1930s in the great purges of the army staff. And Germany's navy was also not prepared. None of the major projects had been completed yet. He didn't have any major surface fleet in order to protect his own borders. And a lot of people argued with Britain's Air Force, which would then have developed. Germany would have had to have seized Belgium or the Netherlands in order to do that. And they probably maybe could have done it in 1939 after maybe taking Czechoslovakia in 1938. But a lot of what the author of the article kind of tries to push on is that it really would have mattered maybe onto what Poland would have done. So obviously you think of World War II in Europe starting in 1939 with the invasion of Poland, but would Poland have defended Czechoslovakia in 1938? Now, if Poland supports the Czechoslovakians, the author himself thinks that the Soviets would have attacked Poland. They wanted to get back at Poland for the Polish attack on the Ukraine in 1920. But if Poland sits back and kind of waits, that probably also means that the Soviets sit back and wait an additional year. So when you look at it overall in a wide encompassing sort of look, 1938 is probably much more favorable for the Allies than 1939. Hitler doesn't have an ally in the Mediterranean. Mussolini isn't necessarily ready to back Hitler in 1938. And Hitler also has to deal with a poor economic situation after the Anschluss. He takes up the Austrian banks, but pretty much by October of 1938, the German people the German nation itself is running on a deficit already, and fighting capabilities would have suffered. He wouldn't have had the necessarily war materials he needed, the steel, the things to make the tanks, the guns, the airplanes, all that sort of stuff wouldn't have necessarily been available in 1938. And that's kind of what the author summarizes in the article. What do I think would have happened in 1938? I think you would have seen a much more World War I style battle. You would have seen a very defensive structure from the Czechoslovakians, which have given the time for Britain to get across the channel. The French would have stuck into the Maginot Line, and Germany probably would have ran up against defensive walls for a few years, and maybe eventually taken Poland after the war machine would have kicked up. But I think the Allies themselves would have been much more prepared on the European mainland, in 1938 than they were in 1939 and eventually 40 when Hitler can launch panzer divisions with quick moving attacking offensives. So that's overall the what if of 1938. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below, and I'll talk to you guys next week.